Hello, Dorothea.
Hello.
So you organized this whole huge conference
Right.
in the last weeks, months.
Mhm.
How does it feel right now to see it all happening?
Well, right now we're on day three of 4 days,
Yeah.
and the first day was super hectic. So I knew that by the end of day one, if we managed to get through that, we'd be okay. And sure enough, I mean, it's been, there'll be minor mishaps, but overall, I'm really pleased at how it's going, and we've got a fantastic team of helpers here. So at the moment, I feel quite relaxed that we can pull through until the very end.
So as Kentaro said yesterday or the day before yesterday, I think you were pretty overwhelmed by the demand for the conference. You didn't plan for, I think, 580 people to come. You had to search for additional accommodation, all that. Do you think this interest reflects general interest in ICT4D rising? Or what do you think is it that there were so many people coming?
I think there's several factors. I mean, overall, I think it's fantastic news for the field, number one. It will certainly have to do with London being a popular location, with, sort of Christmas shopping in London being a factor, and so on. But I think fundamentally what has happened is that we've extended this conference from being a quite focused single strand, sort of single paper strand conference, where essentially you had a strong peer review process, which did intend to kind of filter out and filter the kind of the most excellent papers, but essentially meant that only more or less 20 people who were the paper presenters were kind of doing something, and then there were posters and demos, to a conference where we've got on day 1 and 4 41 open and participatory sessions. So what that effectively does is that it gives a lot more people an incentive to come and engage and have their voices heard. And I think that strategy, worked remarkably well, probably, a lot better than we'd expected, because we were like, oh my God, we were planning for sort of 350, 400 people. And when we went over 500, we knew that, we had a logistical issue on our hands, but we were delighted at the same time.
What's the most exciting thing for you to see at this conference right now?
I think there's something about verbal communication, face-to-face interaction in a space where you get fed, you're in warm environments in the middle of winter, and you're in a sort of hopefully nice green campus where people with very different perspectives find the time to understand each other, even though they're coming from very different perspectives intellectually. They come from different fields, they have different understandings about technology and development and how the two fit together. But you bring them together in the same space, and there's something about our common human experience that makes it that much easier to try to understand where the other person's coming from if you're in the same space together.
Talking about people coming from different fields, how about you personally? Where do you come from? What was your initial interest in the field ICT4D?
I come very much from the D end, as in, to me, development is a lot about the kind of lives that people value, and to me, when I started some of this work in '99 as a volunteer with indigenous communities in Ecuador, actually, what I was keen to see was basically what kind of lives indigenous people there valued, and it was sort of in my experience as a volunteer with in these communities, was that it was a life where you could stay in touch with the younger generation, because those pipe players in the pedestrianized areas of Europe. Basically, some of them are coming from the heart of Ecuador, and these are young people who find a way to fund their travels in Ecuador and around. But their parents back home in the Salasaca Valley of Ecuador would like to know whether they're okay, and would like to know whether, how their kids are. And so it was a fundamental need, one that, many of us share, is like to know whether our loved ones are okay. And in that context, they wanted an internet connection because at that time, cybercafes were becoming available in Europe. And so their sons, and mainly sons actually, were writing emails back and saying, "We were okay, Mum." And so you kind of saw Indigenous women actually going to and looking for an internet connection to find out whether the boy in Europe was okay. And that brought me to understand that, ultimately what I'm interested in is, what are the kinds of lives that people value, and in a world of very rapidly changing technologies, how can we use such powerful means to make it easier for people to live the lives that they value?
So is this your current research?
No. It's moved on tremendously. I mean, I've worked in the meantime. I've kind of worked in Chile. I've worked with India, and I've worked in Kenya, and I come back to this common theme that I'm very interested in, not just the development as economic growth, but development as a way that a process which allows people greater freedom to choose the lives that they have reason to value, if I use Amartya Sen's idea here. And that really has kind of influenced my work across the board. There's some work that I did in Chile where I used that paradigm to basically analyze whether or not technology was making a positive or a negative difference, i.e. whether it was reducing people's choices or increasing people's choices to live the kinds of lives that they expressed to me that they wanted to live. And equally, I don't distinguish between global north and global south in the way of developing and developed countries. I've recently done a project which was very much about giving so-called northern consumers more control of the choices of their consumption, and I'm interested in ethical consumption and how to give northern consumers more control about what kind of things that they buy, finding out what the consequences of their shopping are and what kind of society they are promoting with their shopping choices. And you can do fantastic things with technology, especially mobile technology, to help people make those kinds of decisions, to understand the consequences of their buying behavior, for example.
So ICTs make the world as a whole a bit more transparent, so to say.
That was the idea of this particular project, was the Fair Tracing project. And there's more information on fairtracing.org. It basically talks about how you can make value chains more transparent so that people understand better where the products come from. And both producers and consumers can hopefully find out more about those products and make better decisions and better informed decisions.
Sounds like a very interesting project, yeah. So talking generally about the field of ICT4D, we've seen very, very many different views in the last 2.5 days. We're going to see more different views in the next 1.5 days as well. What do you yourself hope for the field in the future?
Well, I hope very much that at this conference, with the help of so many people, we've created an atmosphere where people are relaxed and have a space in which they can communicate and try to see each other's point of view. And ultimately, what this is about isn't just a bunch of academics kind of, eating decent food and staying together in a nice location. This is ultimately about trying to exchange knowledge in order to make the lives of poor and marginalized people better and allowing more people globally access to a resource which might help them enhance their lives and enhance their choices. And I'd like to see our field to remain committed to actually focusing on those poor and marginalized people, to not get co-opted into market expansion by companies. I think it's important to have partnerships with these companies, but as academics, we have a commitment to those poor and marginalized people first. And I'd like to see us in that process of trying to create positive social change together with people across the world, to do that in a sincere way where we're willing to learn from each other. And I see this as a big learning process in this community, but a learning process with the aim of affecting positive social change with others, with people locally.
So for young people interested in technology and development, what would you advise them right now? Like for somebody just coming from university, what would you advise them to do?
I think, think about what you believe in, what kind of world you would like to grow up in. As in, it sounds silly, but I think we're all growing up in that sense. We're still figuring out what kind of world we'd like to see in a decade or 2 decades' time and so on. And technology will help shape that world, or will help us shape that world. And so the way I think we should think about it, including particularly young people, because they've got a lot of decades to come, is to think about, hang on, what kind of world do I want to live in? And therefore, what kind of technologies, how should the technology be shaped to allow that world to happen? And critically examine the technology, whether this is a technology that basically undermines that world, or it supports it. And there's negotiations there, there's discussions between individuals and groups, and there's going to be discussions around power and conflict and money and all of these kind of things, but we need to have these discussions, and we need to have them in a sense that we start with what world is possible and what world we want. And then we get back to, okay, what technological needs are, and not the other way around.
Who was actually organizing this conference?
Well, basically, it was a bunch of people from the ICT4D Center, the UNESCO chair, which is, in a sense, the part of the kind of center, and the chair and the center are part of the college. But then around that is a collective of postgraduates and practitioners as well, who together form a kind of a space in the community that kind of talk about ICT4D and try to make a difference that way.
And this collective, how is the work of it related to the conference?
Well, there are particular values that have kind of evolved from the history of the collective, which are a lot about a much more bottom-up approach of knowledge creation, where you kind of think about the contributions of postgraduates, where you're trying to bring in a diversity of voices from the global south, from the global north, where you're interested in different formats of knowledge creation, and where there's a genuine wish to engage with each other in a relaxed and friendly way to create spaces in which knowledge can be exchanged. And we try to bring that excitement, but also that, if you want, sort of friendly encounter to a space like the conference here, where there will be a huge diversity of views, and that can only work fruitfully together for this elusive goal development if they themselves kind of feel relaxed enough to let go of these ideas of proprietary knowledge and my disciplinary silo where I feel comfortable, and start actually listening to each other and opening up. And I'm excited that I see some of that happening here at the conference.
Okay, thank you very much for explaining that.